Welcome to the Global Marketing Show, where we explore how language and culture impact global business. I'm Wendy Pease, your host and president of Rapport International. Let's get started. I'm excited that you've turned into this episode of the Global Marketing Show brought to you by Rapport International. We have a fun one today. Before I get into that, let me give you Rapport International's tidbit. It's about the future tense. Written Chinese does not have a future tense. Therefore, the sentence, 我买书 can mean I bought a book, I buy a book, or I will buy a book. So very different than the English language, which you're listening to now, which would have a tense to put a time frame around that and has real cultural implications. But we're not going to dive into that more. We're going to dive into some book talk today. Today's guest is Hannah Pentz. She's a marketing and communications professional with over 25 years of experience, particularly in the business-to-business world. She is my co-author of The Secrets of Global Sales, our new book, which is launching in October of 2025. And she's here so we can talk about the book. So Hannah, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited because I really don't know why you were motivated to actually co-write the book with me.
Well, as you know, we had worked together on turning some really interesting podcasts from your podcast show into longer blogs. And then that really, interests me and inspired me just from hearing so many of the stories, how interesting they were. And each one really told a very different story about some of the challenges of taking a company global. When you mentioned the idea, oh, maybe we could write a book, it seemed like a perfect expansion of what we'd already been working on, really to get into more depth about some of the guests that you had on your podcast.
Oh, okay. And so that's what got your interest. Yeah, it was. I heard that advice of if you go back over the podcast episodes that you have and you pull the ones out and write a blog off of each one and then put them together for a white paper, which then makes chapters for a book. I mean, it's such a brilliant idea. And so I've told that to other people because, turn it around and say, I'm going to write a book seems like a really big elephant to chew. So,
But with podcasts, you already have half your content right there, so it makes it so much easier.
yeah, and yeah, I'm really talking to the experts to pull it out. So who is the audience for this book?
So I would say the audience is really anyone in marketing. That's my background, so that speaks to me. But certainly also sales, CEOs of a company, no matter whether it's large or small, and entrepreneurs. It really speaks to so many different types of people and industries. I mean, as people will see when they read the book, it really covers a wide variety of industries, a wide variety of people that we had interviewed that were coming from different roles in their own company. So it really runs the gamut, and it really shows you how no matter what kind of company you're in, whether it's large or small, whether the company has already had some experience in the global market or not, that so many of the issues are similar.
Right, right. Yeah, that is so true that there's themes that run through.
And what do you think, from your viewpoint, what was the purpose behind creating the book?
Well, I think the purpose behind the book really goes back to the purpose for creating the podcast. And I did that because I learned that the Department of Commerce, US Department of Commerce, has done research and found that companies that export perform better across so many metrics. They have higher revenues, higher sales, higher valuations, higher stability. They pay higher salaries. And so it seems like a no-brainer to export. But if you look at the United States, less than 5% of companies export. And of those, 98% of them are small and mid-sized companies. So I thought the opportunity for the podcast there was let's break down the walls of being afraid of exporting and start talking about how to do it. And, we talk about exporting outside of our borders, but there's a whole opportunity to sell to people who don't speak English within the United States. So I started the podcast for that reason, to help spread the word. But then the idea from the book came from, there's so much information that I didn't include in my first book, which is called The Language of Global Marketing. That's more of, how to get started. But the podcast really brought up some other really good suggestions from practitioners in the field. So I don't know, did we meet the purpose for the book, you think?
I think so. I think we did.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think you learned the most from going through this process?
I think one thing I definitely learned is that all companies, no matter their size, learn from their mistakes. And that was really, really evident in so many of the people that we talked to, either in person or, just writing up. Um, it really didn't matter the size of the company, and also how critical cultural issues are when you're going to market. And and as you know from being in the translation business through Rapport International, it's so important to pay attention to how your materials, if you're translating materials or if you're new and going to market, uh, you know, how critical it is to pay attention to how that's going to impact their the people that these materials or information is going to, and how different it can be. You can't just be a Coca-Cola, for example, and well, maybe that's a bad example because that's super well known. But let's say it's a chip company, right? And you're going to go market your chips in Mexico, and they may not like how chips taste versus how we like it in the United States. And so each company has to really pay attention to their particular audience that they're trying to reach, and how it can really change and should change from one to the other.
I think that's a good point, because there was a chapter in there about doing market research. And it was an interview with somebody that had worked for large companies like PepsiCo, but he was able to help bring it down to, if you're a smaller company, what is the research and how do you ask the questions to get to the chip issue you were talking about?
Right, absolutely. Another point I would just bring up is that I was recently reading an article about how AI, and we have a whole chapter on AI in the book, what a growing impact the whole universe of AI is having. But the point of this piece was that even with the growing influence of AI, that they can't understand the context and the nuance or the emotion. And so it's not necessarily going to take away people's jobs. So many people are worried, oh, with AI, I'm going to lose my job. But that's not necessarily the case, because it can't replace the human touch.
Yeah, that was a really good chapter. Adam Bittlingmeyer, who was actually he worked on Google Translate when it came out. That was an excellent chapter. I'm glad you brought that up. How about what were some of your other favorite chapters?
For me, let's see, I really enjoyed working on chapter 3, which talks about the dangers of going into a market too fast, as well as chapter 8, which really got into the cultural issues that we were talking about a little bit before. Just remembering that there are rules about how to go to market. You can't just wham bam do it. You have to. There are certain rules depending on where you're located or where your market is. But um, so I thought that one was really fascinating. Chapter 8.
Yeah. Any other ones that stand out to you?
No, those were the two that stand out to me. How about you?
Yeah, I like the one on AI. I also like the one on the Stay Curious and Make Connections, number 9, with Nick Canfield, about talking about local language and local connections. He talked about getting drunk with people and how do you handle that.
Right, right.
Um,
That was
and
great.
then I love talking to Randy Roger about how you use your local employees. So many people make the mistake of using them for the translation, and she got into the details and discussion of the finances of why it really didn't make sense.
Right.
Um, yeah, then Walter Brooks is on the potential of trade shows. He had just another barbecue sauce in Atlanta, and he ended up getting a $10 million contract in the Middle East because he went to a trade show with.
Yeah.
That was something
It was really fun.
that
Yeah, that was a
uh,
fun thing to work on.
that was, wasn't it?
Because when
Yeah, and there's all
you
this.
first said, "Oh, let's do one on trade shows," I thought to myself, having been to a million trade shows, I thought that's not going to be so exciting, but it was actually really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, really, the story was great. And I think the thing that was called out the most there was that the Department of Commerce has so many resources to help companies expand internationally. They've got connections, they've got grants, they've got, strategy, they've got all sorts of programs, and some of them are free for US exporters that want to use it. And that's
Right,
Walter did that, and he really benefited from it.
right, and you and your company know so much about that. I didn't know much about that, but that was really interesting to learn about. There's so many.
Yeah, and that's why we included the resource section in the back of the book too. So if people wanted to know who to actually reach out to and get the support, it's all there in the book in the resource section.
Right, right. That's great. Yeah.
So what recommendations would you have? Well, actually, I wanted to ask you about surprises. Were there any surprises about international selling or mistakes that stood out to you that you wouldn't have expected when you started writing?
I think the main surprise for me overall was that how much all of these companies and people had in common, actually. Um, no matter their size, whether they were a little startup or a division of a larger company, that they had so many similar challenges. Um, Sometimes they had similar mistakes, sometimes not, but that was really really interesting to me. Often we assume, oh, it's a big company, they should know what they're doing, and they don't necessarily take into account what effect their marketing is going to have where they are. So I thought that was very, very insightful.
Yes, yes, that is a very good point. Yeah.
Would you have any particular recommendations for a company going global, do you think?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I think I have a bunch of recommendations. One would be to certainly look at it. Through my work at Rapport International, I see that a lot of the companies that export are people who have lived internationally or who immigrated into the US or had some childhood experience uh, living internationally or traveling internationally. And I think it's just a shame that more people aren't open to it. I even had one guy on the podcast at one point that he was in sales for an international company, and he had never left the United States because he figured out all the people that he was targeting was coming into the United States, so he could go to local conferences and really maximize his international sales. So my first thing is just do it. The second is to reach out to the District Export Council or the Department of Commerce in your state to tap into this international community so you can get support. You don't have to make the same mistakes. That's why I have the Language of Global Marketing book and why we have the podcast and why we did this book. And so learn from others and build that network. And I think the third piece of advice that I have is don't just trust AI for your translation. We're seeing all sorts of mistakes. You got to figure out which quality you want and when you can use AI and when you've got to really depend on a human to get those cultural nuances correct.
Absolutely.
So those are my big three recommendations.
Yes, absolutely.
Where can people find us, Hannah? Where can you buy the book?
So the book will be released in October. We don't have a specific date yet, but we'll have it soon. But in the meantime, if you want to receive a copy, reach out to either one of us. You can also find it on Amazon or the Rapport International website.
Yes, absolutely. We'll have a ordering link there. Well, before we wrap up, I just have to say, Hannah, that this has been such a joy to work with you, to get the different perspective, share the writing and the editing, which if anybody's written a book, they know the editing goes on and on and on.
Isn't there a saying about editing is really half the writing? So
Yes, yes. And so
definitely experienced that, didn't we?
oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yes. We had many rounds of edits back and forth, and the editing with the content is good, or how do we say something, or are we complete? That was okay to me, but it's those M dashes and N dashes that I never want to look at again. So thank you so much for doing this with me. I really appreciated all the work that you did as a co-author.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It was really a lot of fun. I learned a lot. It was a great opportunity to work together. So it was really fun.
Well, thank you, everybody. I hope that you have an interest in the book. It's called The Secret of Global Sales. And so you can find it on Amazon when it launches in October 2025, or you can go to the Rapport International website, RAPPORTINTL, short for international.com. And I appreciate you tuning into the podcast. So if you can give us a 5-star rating, or reach out to us and give us your suggestions, and follow us for more podcasts with actual global marketing experts and practitioners to learn more about how you too can become an exporter and improve upon what you're doing. So that's all for now. Au revoir. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Global Marketing Show. We started this podcast to capture the stories of people who do global marketing and work for companies that export, since those companies have higher revenues, higher profits, higher valuations, higher salaries, and more stability, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And if you know somebody who would be a good guest, introduce them to me, your host, Wendy MacKenzie Pease. If you'd like to learn more about global marketing or language translation and interpretation, visit Rapport International's Resource Center at www.rapport translations.com. Au revoir. Hasta luego. Ciao for now.